Gar'Tok the Grey, a story by Karl. The young orc initiates shifted nervously as Elder Kor'gath settled his massive green frame beside the spirit fire. His bare skull helm caught the dancing flames, making the runes etched across its surface seem to move. The bones of ancestors hung from leather thongs around his thick neck, each one a repository of wisdom, each one a connection to the honored dead. "You fidget like prey animals," the old orc shaman growled, his broken tusk catching the firelight as he adjusted his glaive across his battle-scarred lap. "Are you warriors of the Gar'Tok or mice? By your age, I had already stood in 3 shield walls." The largest of the initiates, a youth named Gorn, straightened his spine, his own small tusks jutting out proudly. "Warriors, Elder, we completed our first blood rites at dawn. I took down a cave bear with my father's axe." "Did you now?" Kor'gath's remaining eyes studied their fresh war paint. Simple marks of red and black, nothing like the complex runes that covered his own scarred green flesh. A cave bear is a worthy first kill, but there are greater tests of courage than facing beasts, greater challenges that forge true warriors. The old shaman shifted his glaive across his battle-scarred lap, and one of the younger orcs, barely past his naming day, spoke up. "But, Elder, I thought shamans carried staffs." "That's what the human merchants say." Kor'gath's laugh was like rocks in an avalanche. "Since when do orcs of the Gar'Tok care what humans think? No, young one. A warrior's strength comes not from what he carries, but how he carries it. And that reminds me of a tale of 4 orc brothers who understood this truth better than any." He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a handful of ancestor bones marked with ancient runes. As he cast them into the spirit fire, blue flames leaped up, and for just a moment, the initiates thought they saw 4 massive orc shadows dance across the cave wall. Listen well, young warriors of the Gar'Tok, to the tale of the Brothers Tok, and of how the greatest of them became known as Gar'Tok the Grey. Like young Draka here, Kor'gath nodded to a muscular initiate who clutched his training axe with pride. Gar'Tok understood that true strength lies not just in the power of your strike, but in knowing when and where to land it. Though where you've mastered the 3 basic battle stances, Gar'Tok created master fighting forms that our warriors still study today. The elder's eye fell on Keith, the smallest of the initiates, who often struggled with traditional orc warfare. And like you, young one, Gar'Tok found his power came not from muscle, but from understanding deeper forces. Though where you study terrain and timing, he learned to command the very storms themselves. "And Thutok," he continued, nodding again to Gorn, "moved like you do in the hunt, silent but deadly. A more cutting orc never existed." One of the initiates started to ask about Gar'Tok, but Kor'gath raised a gnarled hand. "The eldest brother's path, that tale will come. First, you must understand how these brothers served Chief Grimok Bloodmane, whose word was stronger than dwarven steel, and whose honor ran deeper than the ancient mountains." The old shaman's voice grew solemn. "The Brothers Tok helped forge our tribe into what we are today. But where there is great honor, darkness often festers in its shadow, and in Maldor, the Chief Grimmak's own brother..." The spirit fire flickered, casting strange shadows as Kor'gath prepared to tell of the treachery that nearly destroyed them all. Kor'gath's weathered fingers traced the runes on a particularly ancient bone as he continued. "In those days, the Gar'Tok were still proving themselves among the tribes. Chief Grimmak led us with wisdom and strength, but it was his brother Maldor who first showed signs of discontent." "Was he not a great warrior too?" asked Keth, the small initiate. "Ah," Kor'gath's eye narrowed. "Maldor was skilled with blade and bow, yes, but where Grimmak earned glory in open combat, Maldor hungered for easier paths to power." The elder cast more bones into the fire, their shapes casting long shadows. "The Brothers Tok served as war chiefs and advisors then. Gar'Tok led our warriors in the summer raids, while Thutok's scouts kept our borders safe. Gar'Tok's storm magic brought rain to our crops and lightning to our enemies." "And what of Gar'Tok?" one of the initiates started, but fell silent at Kor'gath's raised hand. "Watch the flames, young ones," the shaman commanded. "See how they tell of a feast day, 60 summers past." The blue fire swirled, and the young orcs leaned forward as shapes began to form in the smoke. It was a celebration of victory. Gar'Tok had led our warriors to triumph against 3 human kingdoms who had thought to test our borders. The great feast hall was filled with warriors sharing tales of glory, shamans blessing the fallen, children playing between the long tables. Korgath's voice grew distant, lost in memory. None noticed then how Maldor's eyes followed his brother the chief. None saw how he slipped away during the victory rites. Even the Brothers Tok, wise as they were, did not yet understand the darkness growing in our midst. But then came the first signs, livestock found dead in strange ways, warriors speaking of shadows moving against the wind, and in Maldor's dwelling, lights that burned with an unnatural color deep into the night. Gar'Tok was the first to sense something amiss, Korgath continued, his voice low and measured. As a hunter, he knew every shadow in our lands. He noticed tracks leading to caves where no orc should walk, heard whispers that didn't belong to the living. The initiates huddled closer as a cold wind stirred the spirit fire. He brought his concerns to his brothers, but proof of treachery against the chief's blood, that requires more than disturbed earth and uneasy feelings. Gar'Tok counseled patience, suggesting they watch and wait. Tok spoke of strange disturbances in the weave of the arcane, but even he could not see throughout the veil of Maldor's secrets. Gorn, the large initiate, gripped his axe tighter. But they were the Brothers Tok. Surely they could have... Could have what, young one? Korgath's remaining eye fixed on him. Accuse the chief's brother without proof? That is not the Kragthak way. Honor demands evidence before action. He drew a symbol in the dirt with his glaive's butt. The brothers bided their time, watching. Gar'Tok positioned warriors near the suspicious caves, claiming they were training exercises. Gar'Tok's scouts noted every midnight wandering. Tok read the winds and consulted the spirits within them. And Gar'Tok? Asked Keth quietly. The old shaman's face darkened. Gar'Tok felt it worst of all. The ancestors grew restless, their voices troubled. Some fell silent entirely. But even he could not name the evil taking root until... Korgath paused, casting more bones into the fire. The flames turned a sickly green. Until the night of the blood moon, when Gar'Tok followed Maldor to the forbidden caves. What he witnessed there. The elder's voice grew hoarse. Some crimes cannot be unnamed once known. Some betrayals cut deeper than any blade. The young orcs leaned forward, their eyes wide in the dim light. Tell us, whispered Draka, his training axe forgotten in his lap. Maldor had begun practicing the forbidden arts, Korgath growled. Not merely speaking with the dead, as we shamans do, but twisting them, consuming them, breaking the most sacred laws of our people. Korgath's voice dropped to a whisper, forcing the initiates to lean closer. Gar'Tok tracked Maldor through 3 valleys that night, moving like a shadow himself. The trail led to the forbidden caves, those deep places where even our bravest warriors won't tread, where the ancient dead sleep. One of the younger initiates shuddered. Korgath nodded grimly. Through twisting tunnels he followed, deeper and deeper, until he heard chanting, not the honored songs of our shamans, but words that made the very stones weep. When Gar'Tok reached the great chamber, the old shaman's hand tightened on his glaive. He saw what had become of our missing warriors. The dead stood in rings around Maldor, dozens of them, warriors who had fallen in recent battles, their bodies twisted and wrong, their spirits trapped in rotting flesh. And at the center, Maldor held aloft the skull of an ancient chieftain, speaking words that should never be spoken. Korgath traced a protective sign in the air. As Gar'Tok watched, Maldor drew the ancestor's spirit from the skull. But instead of seeking its wisdom, he consumed it, used its power to strengthen his hold over his undead warriors. With each spirit devoured, his power grew. Worse still, the elder continued, Gar'Tok recognized faces among the living gathered around Maldor. Warriors from our own tribe, seduced by promises of power. They held down struggling captives, prisoners meant for sacrifice. The young orcs' faces had gone pale. Even Gorn's grip on his axe had turned white-knuckled. Gar'Tok knew he had to warn his brothers, but as he turned to flee, Korgath paused, the spirit fire casting long shadows. One of the captives screamed, The sound echoed through the caves, and in that moment, Maldor looked up. His eyes, once proud and fierce like his brother Grimok's, had turned as black as the void. "Thutok ran," the shaman said, ran like the winds themselves, with the howls of the dead echoing behind him. But he carried with him something more terrible than fear. He carried certainty. Maldor wasn't just dabbling in darkness. He was building an army of our own dishonored dead, bound by forbidden magic, fueled by consumed spirits. And the worst part? Korgath's remaining eye gleamed in the firelight. Maldor had seen him. Now the Brothers Tok had until sunrise to warn Chief Grimak, knowing that Maldor's forces would not be far behind. Thutok reached his brothers before moonset, Korgath continued, stirring the spirit fire. Gar'Tok immediately began quietly rousing trusted warriors. Magtok prepared his storm rites, but it was Gar'Tok who faced the hardest task, convincing Chief Grimak that his own brother had betrayed everything the Kragthak held sacred. Korgath's voice grew heavy with memory. Gar'Tok found Chief Grimak in the sacred grove, making offerings to the ancestors. The eldest Tok brother knew that what he was about to say would shatter not just the peace of the tribe, but the chief's very heart. "Did Grimak believe him?" Keth asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A chief must listen to his shamans," Korgath replied. "But blood speaks louder than wisdom sometimes." As Gar'Tok spoke of Thutok's discovery, of the desecrated dead and forbidden rituals, Grimak's face grew darker than a storm cloud. The old shaman shifted, his glaive catching the firelight. The chief demanded proof, demanded to see for himself. But even as they argued, the warning drums began to sound from the outer watch posts. Thutok's scouts had spotted movement in the valleys, many movements. The dead were coming. And then, Korgath's remaining eye narrowed, Maldor himself appeared at the grove's edge, but he was changed. His skin had grown pale as moonlight, his eyes black as pitch. The runes carved into his flesh glowed with an unholy light. "Brother?" Maldor's voice echoed unnaturally in the sacred space. "I see your pet shaman has been spreading lies about me." The initiates huddled closer as Korgath continued. Grimak stood between them, his most trusted advisor on one side, his own blood brother on the other. The choice he made in that moment would determine the fate of the entire tribe. Even as Maldor spoke, Korgath continued, the ancestors began to stir. The sacred totems around the grove, carved with the faces of past chiefs, began to weep blood. The offering fire turned black as pitch. Nature itself recoiled from what Maldor had become. "Chief Grimak," Gar'Tok's voice was steady despite the darkness gathering around them. "The ancestors have fallen silent because their spirits have been consumed. Look at your brother. Look with a shaman's eyes at what he has become." The initiates leaned forward as Korgath traced another protective sign. Grimak turned to his brother, and for the first time, he truly saw the void where Maldor's spirit should have been, saw the stolen power writhing beneath his skin, saw the truth that he had refused to face. "You dare judge me, brother?" Maldor's laugh echoed unnaturally. "I have found power you cannot imagine, the dead bow to my will. Soon all the tribes will kneel before the Kragthok." "No!" Grimak's voice was heavy with grief and fury. "You will have them kneel before a monster wearing my brother's face." The chief raised his legendary war axe. "You are no longer of my blood." Thunder cracked overhead as Magtok's storm magic answered his summons. War drums echoed through the valleys as Gar'Tok's warriors moved into position. Thutok's scouts emerged from the shadows, arrows knocked. "Then let blood pay for blood," Maldor snarled. He raised his arms, and the earth itself split open. The dead clawed their way up from ancient graves, warriors of a dozen generations, their spirits trapped in rotting flesh. Among them walked the corrupted warriors of their own tribe, their eyes glowing with stolen power. The battle that followed, Korgath's voice grew grim, would be sung of for generations, brother against brother, the living against the dead, the honor of the Kragthak against the darkest betrayal in our history. Korgath's hands moved in the firelight, casting shadows like clashing warriors on the cave walls. Gar'Tok's warriors met the dead with steel and courage. while Thu'Tok's archers rained arrows from the ridges. Above them all, Magtok's lightning split the sky, striking down the risen corpses. But it was at the heart of the battle where fate would be decided. Chief Grimmack faced his brother before the sacred grove, their warriors fighting and dying around them. The chief's legendary axe glowed with ancestral blessings, while Maldor wielded a blade dark with forbidden magic. "You could have been my greatest ally," Maldor hissed, parrying a mighty blow. "Together, we could have made the Kragthak feared across all lands." "We are warriors, not monsters," Grimmack roared back. "The dead should rest in honor, not serve in chains." The initiates leaned forward as Korgath's voice dropped lower. Their battle raged as fierce as any in our history. Brother against brother, strength against sorcery. Maldor proved that day that he truly had abandoned all honor, the old shaman growled. He used his own corrupted warriors as shields, sacrificing them to buy time. And when Grimmack's axe finally struck true, when it seemed victory was at hand, the betrayer used the very power he'd stolen from our ancestors to tear open the earth itself. A dozen loyal warriors were dragged to their deaths in the chasm, and in the chaos, Maldor fled. The young orcs muttered angrily, but Korgath raised his hand. Yet, even in retreat, justice found him. For as the sun rose over the battlefield, as our warriors burned the dishonored dead and blessed the fallen, Chief Grimmack made his pronouncement. Before all the tribe, before the spirits of our ancestors, he declared Maldor Gravewalker, cast out, exile, his name stripped from our songs, his blood right revoked. Any who saw him were bound by honor to strike him down. But that was not the end of the tale.